Well, very simple question to start then, James. Are you enjoying the race for fourth?
I was until about a fortnight ago. And it's all sort of slightly gone wrong for me since then. But it is interesting. I mean, there are these three teams contesting it, all flawed, all got their problems. And I guess it will ultimately be won by the best of a bad bunch.
Here's the slightly odd thing in all of this, Adam, which is for all clubs, all these three, let's take, although you could use West Ham as an example in the Europa League this season, arguably, for all of them, it might be more fun to not finish fourth, actually. And if they finish fifth or sixth and played Europa League football next season, actually, it might be a better season for them. So when we're talking about this race for fourth, boardrooms are looking at it from a financial point of view, and fans are looking at it in the hope that that means they can then attract Declan Rice, for want of a better example.
Yeah, I think the problem, I think the biggest con the Premier League has produced over the last 10, 15 years is convincing us that finishing fourth matters. And this race for fourth. But you can't really dispute, if you're Mikel Arteta, Antonio Conte, or Eric Ten Hag going into Manchester United, your aspirations are helped by being in the Champions League in terms of who you can recruit, who you can keep at the club, what you're able to do from a wage structure point of view. I think, some of the players, though it doesn't always look like it watching, Arsenal, Man United at the moment, I think quite a lot of them will probably be in line for wage reductions if they fall out of the Champions League. I'm not sure if that's the case at Arsenal, certainly is at Manchester United. So I think that there is, there's a stake in it for players, for managers, for the board, to get into that top four. And I think what it gives, particularly for those clubs like Tottenham, United, Arsenal, that consider themselves coming, it shows a positive direction of travel. And I think particularly for Arteta, it would be a real affirmation of this thing might work. Whereas if he ends up sixth, you're a bit like, we've put a lot of faith in him, and what's it all for?
James?
Well, I think I'd add to that this season feels like a particular opportunity for Arsenal because they're coming through a season where they haven't had any European football whatsoever. And actually, I think history shows that can be a bit of a benefit. We've seen the likes of Liverpool and Chelsea in the past benefit from that kind of schedule. And I think Arsenal have for the vast majority of the season. They've had a relatively light fixture list, and I think it's suited them. It's enabled them to field their first choice 11, have quite a consistent team. And on top of that as well, you're talking about seasons in which both Manchester United and Tottenham have sacked managers. So things have certainly gone in Arsenal's favour, and I think it kind of opened the door to the top four and Champions League qualification for them. And that door now, they appear to be doing quite a good job of closing it themselves. So it would be, as Adam says, quite an underwhelming finish to the season. I think at the start of the season, many Arsenal fans probably would have looked at a top six place as some kind of progress. But having been so close to the Champions League, to lose it at this point would be, like I say, very underwhelming.
And that's where I wonder whether, if you take that step back, and I know they have been so close to the Champions League spot, and they still might get that Champions League spot, but from having no European football to finishing fifth, to some of the signings that they made at the start of the season, to another season under the belt for Saka or, Tierney until he got injured, whatever it may be, if you were to take a step back, you'd probably go more positives than negatives, wouldn't you?
I think there's something to that for sure. I mean, I think if they got into the Champions League this season, they would be kind of ahead of schedule. And I think that might induce some problems for them next year. I've kind of been watching this team thinking, I do not know how they would handle a campaign where they were fighting on the Premier League front and the Champions League front. I mean, Arsenal's squad is very small, and we're seeing that now. It'd be a huge undertaking in the summer in order to get them ready for that sort of season. So yes, it would be a step forward. I think the thing is that how you finish a season is so important in kind of determining sentiment and how people feel about it. And I think Arsenal actually have had a pretty consistent campaign until this point, but it's in danger of collapse. And unfortunately, if that's how it's end, I feel like that's how people will remember it. And that's what could be a problem for Arteta, certainly as far as the fan base is concerned. I think people were really energized and prepared to give him a chance. But if it's another diminuendo at the end of the season, I do worry that some of that patience will evaporate.
You wrote last week about Arsenal's January gambles and that they've left them in the hands of fate. What were those gambles and what could they have done differently?
Well, the main thing was that they didn't bring anybody in. They needed a centre forward and a central midfielder. They were relatively open about that. Mikel Arteta spoke about it, saying, we need to maximise every transfer window at this point in the project. Every opportunity we can to improve the squad, we've got to take it. They didn't. They decided they couldn't get the players they wanted and they'd hold fire until the summer. Now, there is an argument that's kind of a sensible strategy, but it has left them light because what they did on the other side of the coin, they also let a lot of players go. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang is obviously the one that's a slight embarrassment at the moment with the amount of goals he's scoring for Barcelona, but things were clearly broken between him and the club. Listen, I can completely accept letting Aubameyang go. I think the decision to not bring anybody in to replace him, you don't necessarily have to land the star name, the £100 million striker who's going to lead the line. At the current point in time, all you need really is someone who provides a more consistent, reliable option than Eddie Nketiah. And Arsenal didn't do that. And I think it's left them looking light. They've lost Thomas Partey in midfield. Again, they didn't get anyone in there. And I just think we're seeing some of the weakness of the squad exposed. They had a great opportunity in January. They were in such a strong position. They could have pushed on and really kind of cemented their grip on that top four place. They didn't take it. And it's a gamble that, as you suggest, I think it's catching up with them now.
Why did they not take it? Why, did Arteta want those extra players? Was he happier with a small squad? Because I think the instinct of fans sometimes is say, why hasn't the club done this? Why hasn't the board done that? And a lot of these managers, you look at the size of Man City's squad relative to previous years, it's a bit smaller. Sometimes the managers are actually happier, I suppose, managing a smaller group.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And there have been times this season where they've benefited from having that smaller group. Last season, they had this huge bloated squad. They couldn't even register certain players. You may remember the likes of Ozil, Socrates weren't even named in the competitive 25-man squads. And Arsenal did make a decision, especially without European football, to have a more streamlined group. They felt it'd be easier to have everybody feel connected, part of it. You've got less unhappy people on the fringes. And I think that side of it has worked out for them. There's been a great spirit in the camp and they've really bonded. There's been a togetherness. But when it comes to January, certainly everything Arteta said publicly suggested that he wanted additions. He was pretty bullish about it, about the need for Arsenal to push on. Now, it didn't happen. And, what I understand is that it was a strategic decision. They felt like they had their targets who weren't attainable in January. They were prepared to wait for them until the summer. But that was a really high stakes gamble, I think, given what was at play. And it looks like it won't work out. But maybe, as has been suggested, as Mark says, maybe that this is because they accept that if the next step is the top six rather than the top four, then, hey, that's part of the plan and we're prepared to show that patience. Our faith in the manager isn't going anywhere. Maybe they're just taking a long-term view. And to be honest, Arsenal have been criticised a lot for not doing that. It's tricky because they're in a position now where they probably have done that, but equally in the short term, it may cost them.
And also, the fans of Champions League clubs who are already in next season's Champions League will probably laugh at me here and suggest I'm just grasping at straws. But, Adam, there is an argument that, and certainly you could look at it from a Manchester United point of view here, that maybe if you're not in the Champions League, you might get players with a bit more of the so-called right mentality of why they want to come and join or play or whatever. If you're looking at hunger and desire and what they want to build, and you could say the same thing for Arsenal, and you could say the same thing for Tottenham as well.
To an extent, I mean, I think Manchester United's case, they've often, when they've fallen out of the Champions League, ended up just paying a lot more to get those better players and really destabilising their wage bill. The challenge for them this summer, if they do fall out of the Champions League, is, as you say, to try and get those young, hungry, not as obvious players, as the ones they're currently being linked with, perhaps. And I think you're right to an extent, but it depends what stage of players' development you get them at. If you when Man United signed Paul Pogba, I think they were in the Europa League. And they give, obviously a huge contract, huge agent's fee. And that kind of set the tone for the next few years in terms of, well, if he's on that, then he has to be on that, and the other one has to be on that. So it's not straightforward, the recruitment side of it. I think, and the flip side is, last year Man United were in the Champions League for a second consecutive year, and they felt, okay, now's the time to really kick on and get world-class players, Varane, Ronaldo, Sancho, finished article. And sometimes that doesn't work. So I think it's probably a broader question about just how good each individual club is at identifying talent and recruiting.
I do think, but just to jump in, I do think that that is something that Arsenal, I think, have done well this season. I think the strategy in terms of the recruitment has been good. And, Adam mentioned Manchester United players staring down the barrel of a wage cut potentially if they don't make the Champions League. I think kind of the inverse is true at Arsenal, where they've let go a lot of players who maybe had played in the Champions League towards the end of their career. The guys they brought in, they've never been at that level. You're thinking of the signings they made in the summer, the likes of White, Ramsdale and others, the academy players, Saka, Smith Rowe. Realistically, these guys have never been Champions League footballers. If they were to get there, they'd probably expect a wage hike, or there'll be big renegotiations on some of those contracts. Saka and Martinelli due for talks in the summer. So I don't think you can question the motivation of the group. The question is, I think, the depth and the quality, and we're seeing that maybe in some of these recent results.
Just a final one. If Arsenal don't get fourth, is the worst result Tottenham getting fourth? And I don't mean that as a North London rivalry. I actually mean that as in looking at similar players in the summer and how actually your both in London, both great stadiums, etc. There's a lot of stuff that's very similar.
Yeah.
But if one has Champions League football and one doesn't, then that's the difference between the two clubs.
I think you're probably right in that respect. And, United being the commercial powerhouse that they are, and the being Manchester United, they're always going to have that pulling power. Spurs, obviously, they've got their stadium debt, but the Champions League would go a long way towards helping them deal with that and give them budget to spend. And they are looking at the same players. I mean, the guys that Spurs bought in January, Kulusevski is a player that Arsenal watched really, really closely and liked a lot. Bentancur, they'd watched since he was a teenager. You can go back to the summer. Arsenal and Spurs were both looking at Emerson Royale and Takahiro Tomiyasu. They ended up with one each. They are fishing in the same waters. And I think if Spurs were to get, the boost of the reputation and the finances the Champions League brings, that might be a problem for Arsenal.